Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dyslexia Life Hacks Show. I'm your host, Matthew Head, and in this episode, I'm talking to Martin McKay. He's the CEO and co-founder of texthelp. texthelp is a global technology company that helps people to understand and be understood. They started in 1996 and have built technology for education as well as the workspace. Many products to offer, including Read and Write, Equator, Facility Tutor, ClaraRead, to name just a few. Their software has been used by over 50 million people worldwide. I'll put links to Martin and texthelp in the show notes, which will be available at dyslexialifehacks.com/podcast. Welcome to the show, Martin.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for having me on. It's great to get a chance to talk to you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me this evening. So what I wanted to kick off really with is something kind of fun I saw in your profile. You were named EI Entrepreneur of the Year 2022. So that must have been fun to get an award like that after all these years in business.
It was, yeah. And I really wasn't expecting it. I got nominated, and there were 23 other fantastic businesses. And I think one of the things that made EY think that I was interesting, I suppose, was the social impact. We're trying to have a positive social impact. So it's kind of, the businesses were all profitable and growing and very interesting, but I think they really liked the fact that we have a pretty big mission and goal, and we're trying to make the world a better place.
Yes. And I imagine that kind of makes you, as you say, stand out. And it's not just entrepreneur in the sort of neurodiversity or textile space, was it? It was overall out of loads of different companies. Yeah,
there were biotech companies and people in pharma and people in property and all kind of like heavy industry, advanced manufacturing, all sorts of sectors. So a really difficult job for the judges to do. And I really think that I don't know what I did to make them think that I was kind of different from the rest of them. It's a really interesting bunch of people. And it's a fascinating program. Actually, you get to spend time with 23 other business leaders. I've learned a lot over the year. It's a lot of interaction with them, so it's good fun.
Of course, yes. I hadn't really thought of that, because obviously it's the Glitzy Awards ceremony and the news coverage, something like that will get to you. But actually being able to network with all these diverse businesses must have helped you as a CEO of your own grow in different ways.
It's really interesting. So they've been running the program for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
And every year they have 24 businesses. And so there's an alumni. There's like 600 CEOs and an alumni. There's a crazy WhatsApp group.
Okay.
But they surveyed the CEOs, and 42% of the people who responded said they were dyslexic. So there's a disproportionate number of dyslexic CEOs in the world.
Yes. I've seen the data on that before, isn't it? It's an interesting thing. And talking to multiple people throughout this podcast, how many sort of business owners and entrepreneurs there are where they're like, I was in this system and it didn't work as well as I'd like it to, and I decided I'd do my own thing.
Yeah, I think, people just think differently or find it challenging to fit into conventional workplace and end up doing their own thing, or if they're fortunate enough to, at an early stage, find the thing that they're really good at and get other people around them to do the things that they're not very good at. And that kind of moves things forward.
Yeah, key delegator, yes. So where I'd like to go back to actually now, we've talked about the recent awards and its recognition of texthelp, but I want to kind of focus on your life before texthelp and sort of the things you were doing before you started this sort of assistive technology company. Can you take us back to sort of the early 90s in your life?
Yeah, well, when I started the business, so I'm quite old now, right? I'm 53. But when I was 12, I grew up on a farm in very rural Northern Ireland. And when I was 12, my dad had a stroke. And it was quite a serious stroke. And it was a left brain stroke. So he lost the ability to use his right arm and right leg. But your ability to speak is in your left hemisphere. So he lost the ability to speak and lost motion and dexterity on his right-hand side. So I, at a really young age, got exposed to disability and the impact that communication difficulties and kind of mobility and dexterity issues could have. And it really stuck in my head. And I got a computer when I was really young. And I was fortunate enough to get a really crappy computer that you couldn't buy games for it. So I had to write my own games. So I kind of learned to code when I was 12 or 13. And I started making software to try to help my dad communicate. And I ended up turning that into a business. And I started making software for people with stroke and motor neuron disease and cerebral palsy, kind of assistive technology, but more focused on fairly profound communication and motion dexterity disabilities. And I was selling that reasonably successfully in a very small way to universities, to access centres around the UK. And I was in Scotland and I met a lady, this would have been early 90s. And she told me that she had one student with cerebral palsy and about 200 she thought with dyslexia. And at that time, there wasn't any assistive technology that was appropriate for dyslexic people and particularly young adults in university. So I thought, well, let's have a go and see if we can make some tools that can be useful. And already, because of the other things that we built, we already had text-to-speech and we had word prediction and some things like that. So we thought, we can probably make something. And that's how the whole thing started.
Wow, that's kind of interesting. That was going to be my next question, is your link to neurodiversity, how we jumped from helping stroke patients and through to that.
And, I really got, I tried to, become a subject matter expert in the whole thing in the early 90s. And one of the first things that I did, this is before the internet became a widespread thing. I'm sufficiently old to remember the word before the internet. And there was a thing called CompuServe, which your older listeners may remember. And if you had a dial-up modem, you could connect to CompuServe, and they had, it was a pretty large user base. And I got on there and got in contact with a guy in California called Marshall Raskind, who used to run a center for people with learning difficulties. And in the US, like the word learning difficulties or the phrase learning difficulties means a different thing in the US from the UK.
Yeah.
In the US, dyslexia gets kind of bucketed under specific learning difficulties or a specific learning disability. And he ran a center that was funded by Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab is a uber successful investor in California, and he was dyslexic. And then he funded this research center to help understand dyslexia generally and what sort of tools and learning kind of approaches we could take to help dyslexic people in school. And Marshall had his PhD was specifically looking at dyslexic spelling errors and the types of errors that people make and why they make them. So right. I was able to take his PhD thesis and use that to write a dyslexic spell checker. Because I'm sure regular spell checkers don't do a brilliant job. Dyslexic people are pretty creative when it comes to spelling, and a reasonable proportion of the time, normal spell checkers just don't do a good enough job. So we looked at his research and used that to build a spell checker that can kind of reverse engineer dyslexic spelling errors.
Yes, I was thinking that because I was sort of I'm born in the sort of mid 80s, so I was definitely a sort of 10-year-old through my teens in the 90s. Remembering 90s computers, like we had the Acorn in the computer room that was the only place that had computers in the school and all that kind of fun stuff. Now, we didn't have any of that at the time, even though I was stable to dyslexia at that point in my life. But how did you? Because the younger people might know text-to-help and know what it looks like on Windows 10 or 12, whatever we're up to now, and all that kind of thing on Microsoft Word. But back then on the old PCs, how did it work and how did it fit in with the limited RAM and all that kind of stuff back then?
It was definitely it was challenging, and we started making the first version ran on a version of Windows called Windows 3.1.
Yes.
I think the screen resolution would have been like a high screen resolution would have been 800 by 600 pixels. Which is your phone now has got like 16 times that resolution.
Yes.
So, memory management was difficult. And actually in those days, accessibility wasn't really a thing that operating system vendors took seriously. So we had to hack our way into, to make things work. And actually, it was a good thing to learn and a good thing to kind of persevere with, because as new operating systems appeared and accessibility became more of an important issue, I have been fortunate enough to be able to work with Microsoft and Apple and Google, helping them in accessibility working groups to make sure that the things that they build are built with accessibility in mind, so that tools from texthelp and other assistive technology vendors, so that they work well and people have a good user experience. So it's much, much better now, and much, much better than it was in the old days, for sure.
Yeah. And actually, one thing I am curious about before we sort of step into maybe later on in the texthelp journey is, what did the original bit of equipment look like for your dad, like texthelp or whatever it was called back then, whatever working name you'd given it at that point? How did that initial prototype look?
What did it look like? So we had, so at the time, so he had like motion and dexterity kind of issues. So I was trying to make it easier for him to pick as few kind of keystrokes as possible. We had all sorts of things. We had images for him to click on. Now, I should be very clear about this. My dad just did not use it very much.
Okay.
I ended up showing it to other people, and they would say, "Oh, you should show this to someone else." And then I got introduced to someone in Musgrave Park Hospital who ran a rehabilitation centre, and they introduced me to a bunch of people who had multiple sclerosis and CP and so on. So my dad was probably although he was the inspiration to get it started, he certainly wasn't a power user. But we had, things like an on-screen keyboard for people who couldn't manage a physical keyboard. There was a keyboard that was on-screen. It wasn't organized like QWERTY, QWERTY. It had the most frequently used letters in the top left. And then a bar would scan down. And so it would like scan row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 1, row 2, row 3.
Okay.
And then you could blink or tap a switch or interact in some way, and then it would start going across the columns. And then you could identify a letter. And so you could identify a letter, and once you select a letter, the predicted words start to appear. So usually if you can get 2 or 3 letters out, will predict the next word. And then that helps people to kind of progress.
Ah, yes.
So it was just like a text area in the top half of the screen and a keyboard in the bottom half of the screen. Slightly weird looking keyboard, but it was so that people could get to the most frequently used letters quickly and communicate more rapidly.
Wow. And then, of course, you built the algorithm that worked out dyslexic spelling errors. So
yeah.
We're quite good for getting the first letter right and the second and third wrong.
And also, I actually think dyslexic people make really logical spelling errors. It's like English is such a weird language, and it's a combination of so many phonetic roots from other languages. Like we have, all the time we're improving this, but I remember in the really early days, a teacher telling me that they had a kid who typed the way that they spelled the word elephant was LEFANT, and it's really logical.
Yes.
Elephant, or they'll spell physics FIZIX. Again, it's like super logical. But if you try both those words like that in, Microsoft Word or Google's spelling checker, they just don't get it. So, but if you think about it from a phonetics perspective and kind of reverse engineer it, it's very often it's logical. Sometimes there's a lot of kind of people swap letters around by accident, or they leave a letter out or put an extra letter in. But there's like 7 or 8 things that you can do, and if you logically go about each of those things, you can get to the right word.
Yes. The phonetic spelling is always like you used to do it underneath the bread, sounding the word out and writing it down. And like I've gone a long way since then, but I remember that at school and just being well off.
I know. I know what it's like. I'm dyslexic, and my daughter's dyslexic.
Yeah.
Our family chat group is a spelling disaster. It's funny. We're so good.
So interesting you are dyslexic yourself. When did you find out in the journey with texthelp? Was that at some point you talked to somebody about texthelp? Like, I've got this thing and it does this. And they're like, how much do you use your own products?
Yeah, well, I've suspected for years, but I only got diagnosed really late. And I was kind of funny thing, I knew I was dyslexic. I was pretty confident that I was dyslexic when I was 14. And I actually went to my English teacher and said, hey, do you think I'm dyslexic? And I was actually, in some subjects, I was like really quite bright and did really, really well. Maths and chemistry and physics and biology. And, but my English, I had to work really hard. And she kind of broadly looked at all my grades and said, no, you can't be. Just kind of forgot about it. But relatively recently, just like a couple of years ago, I decided to go and have a formal assessment. And I'm actually, I can tell you why we did this. My daughter is dyslexic, and she struggled at school, and they did an assessment, but they didn't pick it up, and she still continued to struggle. And then she worked really hard. She got to university, and then she had another assessment at university, and they confirmed, yes, really, really quite dyslexic. Particularly her spelling and her short-term memory. And they, because of that, she got the DSA. She's got lots of support in Queen's, fantastic university, take good accessibility and supporting students very seriously. And but it became a topic of conversation around our dinner table. And she was saying things like, when I read, it's like sometimes I read it and I just don't remember it at all. And with her spelling, everyone knew her spelling was like hilariously just crazy. And I kept saying, that is just exactly like me. So I kind of, without saying to anyone, I went off and booked an assessment. And it was a really interesting process. It took, 4 hours, maybe a half a day sort of thing. And some things I'm very, very good at, and some things I'm very, very bad at. So there's 3 or 4 things I kind of tested at the 98th or 99th percentile, but there's a few areas where I'm just terrible. And if I read aloud, my memory is good. I can read fine, but if I read silently, it doesn't. My memory, I don't comprehend it as well. My recall is not as good, and that's one of the reasons why text to speech is so useful. The way that I think of it is, we're a conversational species. We've been around for a very long time, talking to each other and making noises for a very, very long time. And the written word has only been around for a few hundred years. And for the first 100 years of that, it was a very, very small percentage of humans who had to interact with text. And I actually think it's maybe quite an interesting phase of human evolution, because I think that text is probably going to become potentially a little bit less important in the future. As it becomes super easy to create digital content and, record audio and video in a way that, would have been inconceivable even just 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah. Just an amusing thought. Did the assessor know what you did? And was there that funny moment at the end of it? Like, I could recommend you some products, and
no,
like, 3 of yours.
I did say at the beginning, because I have been, I'm a kind of reasonably well versed in the whole area, and we do some work with an organization in the US that is it's called CAST, the Center for Applied Special Technology, but it's spun out of Harvard University, and it's really focused on kids with special education. And I was talking to one of the researchers there, saying, "I'm thinking about getting assessed because my daughter is dyslexic, and I'm pretty certain I am based on those conversations." And they said, that is going to be challenging because you're over 50 and you'll have developed so many coping mechanisms that it will be difficult for them to identify. But I spoke to the person doing the assessment and explained, that it might be difficult to spot because of my coping mechanisms. And she said, no problem. We'll get right to the nub of it. And she did. So
And then have you heard of this product called Read and Write, sir?
Yeah, she was aware of it actually because she's the company do assessments for education and workplace.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was the thing about it is I've been using our own tools for quite a while. I just find them easy. It just I can kind of press play and listen to a document, and it's just much easier for me to consume it that way.
Yeah. So dyslexic 12-year-old, and you taught yourself to code in the sort of 90s, late 80s, early days of computing. Now, I'm not much of a coder, but I hung around with enough electrical engineers at uni to know what coding looks like. How did you make sure everything was spelt right for that? Because that's normally like one letter wrong and it just goes...
I know. That's the thing. In the old days, if you're coding in a modern coding environment, you type a couple of letters and it predicts ahead and, manages all that stuff for you. You're much less likely to make a silly little, syntax error. But in the old days, you're absolutely right. A comma in the wrong place or a tiny misspelling and nothing worked. So I spent a lot of time debugging, trying to search for errors. Probably wasn't the most productive coder actually, but still enjoyed it and still enjoy it even today.
Yeah.
I'm doing it in my work life, but I still tinker.
Oh, you still keep a hand in on the coding? That's really cool.
Well, yeah, but not in any of our products because they just wouldn't be at the races today. Our team are much better than me.
Yes.
Than I ever was. Yeah.
You don't come into work. By the way, I thought of this in the evening.
I think that's one of the. I absolutely know my limitations, and people around me who can do the stuff that I can't do. So.
Yeah, cool. Yes, definitely. And, that's an important thing to know when you get your own limitations and in your position, you employ people who can make great products. So we've talked a lot about the early days of texthelp. Now you sort of tweaked it from initially farther into dyslexia. But how did the company grow after that? Like, I got you down as co-founder, and obviously starting quite small and grown as IT grew, I guess, as it got into more and more schools.
I think there's like 2 or 3 things. We've been very fortunate. We grew really slowly. The thing about it is if you grow like 10 or 20% every year over 30 years, it does get just quite big.
Yeah.
We started out in the UK, really focused on the DSA. So, mainly young adults at university. And then we added some features that were more appropriate for younger kids. The next thing that we started doing was, I've always been quite ambitious, and kind of wanted to do something quite big and impactful. And so we started then to look at expanding into the US. And there's an organization called Invest Northern Ireland, and they have an office in Boston. And to help companies export, they'll give you a desk or 2 or 3 desks in their office. So we did that. We took a couple of desks in Boston and hired someone there and started to grow the business there. And it took us 7 years to break even. The US was a tough market for us to get into. We had to localize the product and have like the text had to have a US accent. We had to redo the spelling thing,
of course,
spelling.
Yeah, drop the U out color and all that kind of stuff.
All the dictionary definitions had to be, kind of rewritten or spell checked. And it took us probably two years to get the product right, and then we started to get some traction. I think in Kentucky, in 1998, I think, maybe around.
Random.
Yeah, well, this has all got to do with people. There was a guy in Kentucky who was the state director of special education, a guy called Preston Lewis. Okay. And he was really passionate about inclusion and supporting kids in special education. And they wanted to, this is like so long ago, but they wanted to do their state test, which it would be in the US at grade 4 and grade 8. There's a pretty important assessment that kids take. And it used to be on paper. And in Kentucky, they wanted to go online and have an online paper, an online assessment, but they also wanted to then accessibility features so that kids in special ed could take the assessment and, be included along with everyone else. So we ended up tendering for that project against a couple of competitors in the US, and we were successful. And that was the kind of first, big break that we had in the US. And because of that, then we had to hire more staff there to do local tech support and local training and all that sort of stuff. And I'm not sure which piece happened next. I think, that just kind of grew for maybe another 10 or 15 years. But Google entered the education market with Chromebooks. And we had been playing around with a JavaScript version of our product. And Chromebooks are basically just a web browser with a keyboard.
Yes.
If you can make stuff happen in JavaScript, you can make stuff happen on Chromebooks. And we were, because of the work that we'd done, we were able to be first to market with a product for dyslexic kids and kids in special education with Chromebooks. And that was quite a breakthrough for us. We didn't know how we were going to, we just didn't know what we were doing, but we put the product in the Chrome store to see if it would work. It's to see if there was demand or interest. We just put it in there free. And in the first weekend, we got 30,000 users. And,
wow.
And then, by the end of that year, we had 1 million users. And it took us a while to get the product fine-tuned and get everything right. But we've had the read and write for Chrome product. We've had, I think, about 60 million users use that software so far, and that's been a bit of a breakthrough for us. It's been very good, great to reach that many people. We try to make it, super affordable so that it can just be made available for all kids. And then, probably around the same time, we also were looking at, whenever kids leave school, they don't leave dyslexia behind and they go into the workplace.
Yes.
And I think there's a really important thing in schools. Dyslexic kids have got advocates. They've got someone looking out for them. So there's a teacher or in the UK, a SENCO, a special educational needs coordinator, and they keep their eyes open for kids who are struggling and maybe get an assessment and get them assistive technology and help them out. But in workplace, people are adults and they don't have that advocate looking out for them. 76% of people will not disclose that they've got dyslexia in the workplace because they think it's a career-limiting disclosure.
Mm.
And so we've made a version of our product for workplace. We are working with kind of progressive, forward-thinking companies who look after their employees to make our software available to all staff without having to disclose that they're dyslexic. And we're very proud and happy to be, work with EY, PwC, lots and lots of very big global businesses are now thinking that way and making their software available for their employees. And we started to do a thing last year, which I'm really proud of. We decided to make our software available to employees' families. So if a business decides to get our software for their staff,
oh wow,
we also make it available for their families, because depending on your ethnic background, if you're dyslexic, you're 40 to 60% likely to have a dyslexic kid. And so, so it becomes, instead of just a piece of assistive technology for the workplace, it becomes like a staff benefit.
Yes.
So that's been a really popular thing. And
I can imagine.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? We've got Amazon became a customer this year.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
One of their goals is to be Earth's best employer. And so they're being pretty serious about their inclusion, and very good to be partnering with companies like that. Yeah,
that is from the humble beginnings to working with one of the world's biggest companies. It's got to be exciting, isn't it?
Well, it is good. And then I suppose in 2017 we got a little bit more ambitious, and we decided to take on some private equity investment and grow more, get more ambitious. And then we took some more on in 2020, and we got investment from a fund from the Rothschilds Group. And so they're actually really serious about special education, and the funding that they gave us allowed us to acquire some other similar businesses around the world.
Yes.
So there's one of the first company that we acquired was in Norway, a fantastic business called Linget. And it really was just a Norwegian version of texthelp. It's a toolbar for Norwegian dyslexic people, and it's got spell checking and, grammar checking and text to speech and prediction and all the things that we have in our products, just in Norwegian. And then we did the same thing in Denmark with a company called WizKids, and then in the US with, I think, probably the world's oldest assistive technology company, a company called Don Johnson, who've been around for 40 years, believe it or not.
Wow.
So we acquired Don Johnson, and then more recently a company called Aribi in Sweden. But all these businesses are doing a very similar thing. And the logic behind buying them and getting them all into one group is a little bit similar to, if there are any car enthusiasts who listen to who listen to the podcast. So the Volkswagen Group.
Yes.
So when Volkswagen brought together Audi and Volkswagen and Skoda and Seat, there was a very wide range of product quality. People used to make jokes about Skoda, 20 years ago. And nowadays, if you get into a Volkswagen Golf or an Audi A3 or a Seat Leon or a Skoda, I can't remember which model, but it's the same chassis, the same engine management system, same brakes. The quality of the products has got much better. They've got much more efficient, but there's still a really good choice of products, and there's still a very different user experience. So what we have done over the last couple of years is look across the group and get the best spell checking technology, the best grammar checking, the best text to speech, and get those all into a common platform so that everything should be getting a little bit better. But we still have localized very different user experiences across all of the countries. So, we've got about half of the business now is in the US and Canada, and about 20% is in the Nordics, about 25% in the UK and Ireland. And so far we have helped 200 million people, with their comprehension and writing in some way. And we have a really big goal to try to get to 1 billion people by 2030. So we need to, grow. We need to double 2 or 3 more times to get that.
Yeah. How are you finding, sort of, I don't know if the competition, but I can't, for want of a better word, Microsoft Office and stuff, their spell checker and grammar checker is getting better all the time. Like, I think the last time I used texthelp would have been in 2015-ish when I was still at uni. And then I look at the more modern Microsoft Office and you're like, wow, that's obviously better than way back then. So how do you keep yourself either ahead or differentiate? Different.
Different. Yeah. So it's a really good question. And there's a couple of things. Just first of all, we try to, and we think we're successful at, and I don't want to throw stones at Microsoft because they're our partner, our Microsoft Gold partner. We work very closely with them to make sure that works really well. And they do the kind of basics in a pretty okay way if you're using a Microsoft product. But the thing about it is, in someone's general all day life, they spend some time in Microsoft Word, but a lot of the time they spend in their CRM system or Slack or there are umpteen other products, and not using a Microsoft product, it just won't work in there. And if you use Chrome as your browser, it's not going to, it's not going to work there. So what we try to do is do a really good job of fixing your spelling mistakes, do a really good job of fixing your grammar, do a really good job of, predicting, but also giving you that really consistent user experience. And it doesn't matter if you're in a Microsoft product or a Google product or some completely separate product. It doesn't matter if you're on an iPad or an iPhone or a Chromebook or a PC or a Mac. We're trying to be a little bit like Netflix. We don't care what device you're using. We just want to help you understand what's on the screen in front of you, help you express your knowledge, and help make yourself understood in a really consistent way. And like all of those things should just be better than the kind of built-in tools.
Yes. So that's kind of interesting. And obviously we've focused a lot on the sort of spelling side of it, but texthelp does have products and things that do other things as outside of that, don't they? I don't want to sort of misrepresent it as a thing that really just does spelling and grammar. There's a lot of other things on the screen.
It does, like there's lots of stuff. I mean, lots of people have, and it's not just for people with dyslexia.
Yes.
With other neurodiverse conditions like ADHD who have difficulty with focus.
Yes.
If you go to a web page, and like if you go to, I'm not saying the BBC News, because BBC News is actually really pretty clear and easy to look at. But if you look at a commercial news website that has got adverts scattered all through it,
yes.
Many people with dyslexia and ADHD struggle just because of the cognitive load of the design of the page. So we've got some tools that will simplify the way the page looks, and we'll get rid of a lot of the imagery and give you a really simple text view. We've also got some AI tools now that will summarize a page, because if you've got like 300 words of text, a lot of people just won't start, will not try, because 300 words is just going to be too much cognitive load. So we can turn 300 words into 100 words, and we can reduce the reading age. We can reduce the sentence length. We can, remove difficult words and replace them with simpler words to just lower the cognitive load. There's quite a bit of research that's, there's a guy in the University of Central Florida called Dave Eddyburn who's done some research on that. And if you can reduce the cognitive load of content, you're much more likely to have people engage with it and read through it. And this is one of the things I've been trying to, I kind of almost jokingly say we're trying to make the world easier to understand. I wish our tools weren't needed because if people would just write things simply, with short sentences and easy to understand text, then they would have much more engagement. People would spend more time reading the content and interacting with it. And I think I'm a fan of simple, plain English. And I think that is probably my own, that's probably my own dyslexia. We were laughing about this a couple of months ago at work. Someone in the marketing team will write some copy, and I will very often say, can you do that over again, but just write it for a 9-year-old? And I think if you try to write something for a 9-year-old, everyone can understand it, and it's just much easier. So we try to do, when you think about comprehension, we do like text-to-speech, talking dictionary definitions. There's picture dictionary, so if people don't understand what a word means, we'll pop up an image of what that word means.
Oh, cool.
If the text is too long, we'll shorten it and simplify it. If there's complex vocabulary in it, we'll replace the complex words with simple words that mean the same thing. Lots and lots of simple things. And it's a little bit of a Swiss Army knife, but usually people only use 3 or 4 tools, and it's the ones that they need that are particularly useful for them. There's screen tints. Some people like to have black and white is difficult for them to focus on. So you can press the button and it will tint the whole screen, so that you can see blue and yellow or whatever color scheme you want. There's other tools that kind of like make a letterbox appear on the screen that kind of dims everything out apart from the stripe across, and you can just move the stripe up and down, helps people focus. Lots and lots of very simple things that just make the computing experience a little bit easier.
Yes. Wow. That's just, as you say, a Swiss Army knife, and I bet most users don't scratch the surface of what it's capable of at points.
There are probably, 7 or 8 features that get used a lot. And people who, dyslexia and ADHD and a whole bunch of neurodiverse conditions are generally a collection of, I don't even like to say symptoms, just differences, just learning differences. And we provide tools to try to compensate for each of those learning differences and just make their computer a bit easier to use.
Yeah. And we've been talking, obviously, it's been around since 96, and we spoke a lot about the trajectory till now and all the tools that come in and how it's grown and what competitors do and everything else. And just finding software that dives on Chromebooks was a good move. One thing I'm really interested in is, like, obviously the business didn't just linearly grow and you had success after success. There was obviously some low points and failures. Which one, any particular failure that comes to mind that you end up learning a lot from?
Oh my goodness me! When I look back, I don't see all that much success. I just keep, oh my God, we could have done this so much better. Every time you make a mistake, you learn from it. So
of course,
I've made lots. From a business perspective, we almost ran out of money in 1998, and I was very, very fortunate when I started out to have my parents. I grew up in, as I said, kind of really small family farm, and my parents gave me the deeds for part of the farm for security to borrow some money to get the thing started, and we almost lost it. And I remember standing in front of a mirror, rehearsing the speech to my parents to say, I'm sorry, I've messed up and we've lost this piece of land. And thankfully, at the last minute, we were able to secure some bridging finance, and we were able to, it worked out okay in the end. But it also, it's made me made me very risk averse for a little while. There also, I kind of got a bunch of regrets about not being more ambitious and trying to go faster and have more social impact. Because I think if I had got more ambition earlier, we could be much bigger than
Yeah. And you're focusing today a lot more on the social impact than it did in the past. And how are you trying to, I know we've spoken about making sure that family members of companies that use texthelp and it cascades down that way. What other strategies have you got going for that kind of area?
Well, quite a few things. In education, we have been working for years and years with departments of education to influence policy, so that I worked for a number of years on a project with the US Department of Education to make sure that disabled students had access to accessible books. So every school textbook that's available, there's a digital accessible version of it now required by law. And I was involved in that project and helping design the accessibility format for that set of books. We're involved in trying to, one of the things that really needs to happen, the education, ecosystem is pretty good, and there's pretty good provision and pretty good legislation and regulations in place. But in workplace, there's to require that dyslexic people disclose that they're dyslexic is I think something that needs to change. And the way that I describe this when I'm talking to employers is that there are more dyslexic people in the world than blue-eyed people. So every time you look around your workplace and you see a blue-eyed person, you got to think, well, there's a dyslexic person around here as well. And what are we doing and they're probably not going to put their hand up. They're probably, good percentage of people are embarrassed about it and they just don't want to talk about it. And it's career limiting. So we are trying to get chief people officers to just realize that this is a component of their workforce and they are super valuable, think differently and in a really often creative way. And if you don't have neurodiverse people in your team, then their input is not going to be involved in product design or service delivery. And then your product design and service delivery won't be appropriate for neurodiverse people. And you're kind of excluding your products and services from that portion of the market. So there's just I know that was a lot of waffle, Matthew, but we're trying to influence people to think differently about neurodiversity. And I do think that the world is changing for the better, hugely. If you think about the number of people from like Hollywood and government and politicians who openly say that they're dyslexic now, and 20 years ago that wouldn't have happened at all. And it's kind of even in classrooms, 20 years ago, people who were diagnosed as dyslexic, they would have associated that with low intelligence. And and it's just because of the way that people used to judge people's intelligence was in how they performed in a written comprehension test. And that's specifically a thing that dyslexic people are just poor at. And they're often really good at, in fact, they are very, very often really good at something else. There were 4 universities 1 in Canada and 3 in the US who did some research in this. And there's a bell curve of intelligence for the general population, kind of IQ bell curve.
Mm-hmm.
There's a bell curve of intelligence for people with dyslexia, and they're not different. There's no kind of correlation between dyslexia and intelligence. They're just better at different things. And if you've had a dyslexia assessment, your verbal reasoning is probably very high, and your written work is probably not very high. That's just I'm the same. And there was a researcher, there's a neuroscientist from France who did some work on this. So he put people in an MRI scanner and gave them cognitive tasks to do, and observed what part of their brain was getting the most blood flow. And he gave them reading tasks and pattern recognition tasks. And he did this with dyslexic people and non-dyslexic people. And he had to get a control group. To have a good scientific experiment, you need to have a control group. And his control group had to be non-literate. And that means not having... So if you get someone who is illiterate, who lives in New York, all their life they'll have been exposed to text and subway signs and shop signs and so on. So he had to get people who had not been exposed to text. So he went to the jungle and got people and trained them how to get into an MRI scanner. And they had tasks not related to reading, but related to pattern matching. And the piece of the human brain that I'm going to use the word neurotypical, but kind of non-dyslexic people use. Dyslexic people just use it for something else. And it's a really powerful pattern matcher. And dyslexic people are often very, very good at matching patterns, seeing patterns in data, 3D design, visualization. They use that piece of the brain for something else. And that's it's a scientific fact. And all these people are in the workplace, and they are, a bunch of them are being asked to fulfill a task that they're not very good at. And it's like asking a short person to do stuff on the tall shelves. Whereas they'll be really good at something else. So it's one of the things we're trying to do is to get people to just realize that dyslexia is not, I really dislike that people sort of classify it as a disability. I wish the UK would not call the Disabled Students Allowance the Disabled Students Allowance. It really is just a difference. And in the same way that I need glasses to read, like whenever I take my glasses off, I cannot comprehend what is on the screen. And it's not related to my intelligence, it's related to my glasses. And when I put my glasses on, I can comprehend again. So we're trying to get the sort of tools that we create. We want people to just think about them like glasses. They shouldn't be weird. It should just be pretty commonplace for people to have them available. Yeah, it's a really good analogy, isn't it? The glasses are normal for everybody. You don't walk past that person like, he's got glasses on, do you? Like, you wait. It's just glasses. Yeah. Like they do a job, which is make your eyes to see. Make it more effective. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So every guest that comes to this podcast gets 3 rapid fire questions from me. They don't need rapid fire answers from you, but they are sort of quick things we do to round the podcast out. So let's dive into question number 1. What prejudice about dyslexia have you had that's been proven wrong? That's a really good question. That is a really good question. I don't know, possibly, kind of that there's a one-size-fits-all solution for dyslexia. And I just think everyone is completely different. And if you get 100 dyslexic people in the room, you'll have 100 different experiences. There's just a very diverse set of symptoms, intelligence that present themselves. I think no 2 dyslexic people are the same. There's a bunch of commonalities, but everyone's very different. Yes, I agree with that. No 2 dyslexics are the same. It's we are quite a varied and diverse group. Okay, question number 2. If an alien landed and you had to describe dyslexia to them, how would you do it? I would say we think differently. And, I would say, like 80% of the population think one way, and dyslexic people think a little bit differently and have different strengths and weaknesses. And there's a lady called Kate Griggs who runs an organ. So Kate has as her strapline, expect small typos and big thinking. I think that's a really good way to capture it.
Yeah, small typos, big thinking. That's really cool. I hadn't realized you did that. Okay, final question is rapid fire set, and you're not allowed to answer with your own products on this one. But seeing as this is the Dyslexia Life Hack show, what is your favorite dyslexia life hack?
My favorite dyslexia life hack is subtitles.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, so it's almost like text-to-speech in reverse, but and there's evidence for this. I like the data, and I like kind of science to back up everything that we do. And so I know this is not a rapid fire answer, Matthew, but this is worth listening to, right? So
yeah, I don't need rapid fire answers. It's just quick ones from me, so we're all good.
Yeah. So when subtitles first came out, they were designed for people who were deaf or hard of hearing. And when it became a legal requirement to add subtitles to all movies and TV, the production companies were saying this is going to be so expensive, and it's not going to be practical. And over the last few years, it's become super inexpensive to do it. But some research has been conducted to show that when people have subtitles switched on, they remember more of the movie. So their comprehension and recall is higher. And it's because of the multimodal learning. So as well as listening to the text, you're seeing the text, and both neural pathways get activated. And all that comprehension is recall, remembering the facts. And because you're engaging two neural pathways, and you learn more, and your chances of recall are better. And it may seem unconventional, but the research indicates that if you watch a movie with subtitles, you will be more engaged. In fact, people who are deaf or hard of hearing are, I think, the fourth largest group of people who use subtitles. And the largest group are people who are in airports. The second largest group are people who are in sports bars. The third largest group are people who are at home watching TV and they want to keep the volume down and not wake their partner. And the fourth group are people with hearing impairment. And it's an example of something that was designed for one disability that ends up having a broader benefit for the wider population.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I wonder if that's the same effect. Like an audiobook now syncs up to Kindle, so you can read along with your Kindle as well as listen to the book at the same time.
Yeah, I'm a voracious Audible fan.
Me too.
Yeah. And I ramps are the same. There was legislation to. I'm a huge fan of universal design. If you design a hotel for everyone, there's a ramp at the front door, and the legal reason for the ramp being there is for people in wheelchairs. That if you stand across the road and watch the hotel, 1% of the users are in wheelchairs. The rest of the people have suitcases or FedEx person with a cart, or people with prams or buggies. So if you design something well, you end up having all these unintended benefits. So like our software ends up being used by kids who don't have English as the first language. Probably.
Of course. Yeah, and that's it. And also with good design, you almost don't notice the ramp is not as actually tacked on. It's part of the
if it's designed in, if it's kind of accessibility first and it's really designed universally, it can be a beautiful thing that just adds to the utility of the whole business.
Yes.
So that's kind of
cool. Yes, brilliant. And okay, so before we sign off, is there anything else you'd like to add, and where can people find you?
First of all, I want to thank you, Matthew, for having me on here. I really appreciate the chance to get to talk to you. I think what you're doing is absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
If you want to learn about TextHelp, you can just go to texthelp.com. I apologize for the difficult. So it's texthelp.com. And I know that that's sometimes difficult to spell, but you know what? If you type it into Google and get it almost right, you'll find us.
Yeah, we get you there eventually, and of course I'll link it in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
So that just leaves me to thank you very much for taking the time to come on. It's been really interesting hearing your journey through TextHelp and how the whole thing has evolved and changed over the years, and the different ways you've got into place. It's kind of fun to understand how these things have grown from a company I recognise and seen around to how it started.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for your time.
No worries. And I want to thank everybody else for taking the time to listen, and I'll speak to you in the next episode. Goodbye for now.